Blair, welcome. Let's get right into it. So I would love to know what life choices you have made, so your trajectory to financial independence. Where does it all start and where do we end up?
Okay. It all starts way before I knew anything about financial independence. I knew nothing about money. I had no idea at the moment that this would be the pivotal decision. But it was 2006, February. I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was broke. I had student loans, I had a car payment, could barely afford rent. Credit card debt was piling up. And it was the end of February. I was working at a bakery where I woke up at 4 a.m. to bake bread off in the mornings. And I was doing like some part-time work at an art museum because I was an art major. And it was the end of February, and I opened the cupboard thinking about like, how am I going to eat until my next paycheck? Because there were a few days left before I would get paid again, and I had nothing. I opened the cupboard, there were lentils and there was rice. And I was thinking, if I just had an onion, this would be doable. Like if I had an onion and I could make a big pot of lentils and eat it with rice for 3 days, like I could handle that. But I didn't even have 50 cents to go buy an onion. I didn't even have that. And that was the moment where I kind of hit bottom of realizing that I couldn't survive the way that I was going, that I was digging a deeper hole. I wasn't going to get anywhere, and I needed to make a change in my life. So that was the point where I decided to take a big risk and go to graduate school to get teaching licensure, because I knew I couldn't just go study something that I was interested in. And I knew I couldn't handle doing a degree that didn't guarantee a job almost immediately. I needed work immediately. So in Georgia, where I'm from, they had a lateral entry program where you could do a master's degree and you start teaching while you're doing your degree. So you get a job right away and you sort of get your degree and your licensure while you're already teaching. So that's what I did. I took out loans to cover the fees, and I became a teacher. And that pivotal moment set me up for everything that came after, but I had no idea at the time. It was a decision out of desperation, truly. There were several other knock-on decisions that happened, but then almost exactly 20 years later, because that was 2006, it's 2026 now, my portfolio, my net worth actually hit $1 million this year, my personal portfolio. But 2 years ago, my husband and I together, we hit our FI number in 2024, which means we had enough money invested between the two of us for us to live on indefinitely without ever having to work again. So we got there, and I had no idea when I was 25 that this was even possible. Like the idea at that point in my life, the idea that there could be a time where you don't have to work for money, that just didn't exist in my lexicon. I just assumed I would be working for the rest of my life.
Where, so you don't have like family members or anyone that has learned how to invest and end up in the same situations? It was completely foreign. Wh- how did you learn this? Like, what was the first exposure to this? Because
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people know what fire is. Maybe they do, but
No.
maybe.
Okay. So I had no idea. I knew nothing about money. My parents were hard workers, but low wage earners for the most part. My mom actually had a university degree, but she left work when me and my brother were very young, and before my little brother and sister were born. And my dad worked for like $10 an hour most of my childhood, driving trucks, doing deliveries, cleaning office buildings. Like we just had no money awareness in my family. So I had no grounding, no idea of what investing was. In high school, in economics class, you learned about the stock market, but they really taught you about active trading, about sort of buying low and selling high, sort of that's kind of how it was presented as a form of gambling. And to me, that was morally reprehensible, like that idea that basically you make money off of other people who are selling you something they don't know is worth more than it is, right? So I was really put off by that idea. I came to the idea of fire in a gradual process. It started I'm going to give a little bit more background. So I became a teacher. I taught in a very difficult school in my hometown of Savannah for 2 years. Then I had the opportunity to take over a maternity leave at a private school, which would be a much nicer, easier job because it was very stressful at the school that I was working at. And that was 2008 when I took that maternity leave. By 2009, because of the great financial crisis in the US, there were no jobs for teachers. No one was hiring a teacher anywhere in the state and in most of the US. So I was now out of work. And by that point, I had a mortgage to pay, still had student loans, still had car loans. I was stuck. So over the summer, I did a language exchange program online where I was like talking to this college student in Morocco to learn French. And he was learning English. And I told him about my situation, about how I was a teacher and there were no jobs and I didn't know what I was going to do. And he's like, oh, well, why don't you just come work here? They're always hiring English teachers here in Morocco at the language schools. So I just started looking at schools abroad. I started looking at job boards for teaching internationally. And then I found a job in Abu Dhabi. At the time, they were hiring for the first time, they were hiring foreign teachers to come into their public school system. And it paid double what I had been making in the US. And they paid for your flights to get there. You didn't have to have money to go. You could go when you were broke. They would pay for your flights, they would pay for your housing, and then your salary would be tax-free. And it was nearly double. I think after you count in the housing and the flights, I was compensated double what I had been making as a teacher in the US. So I did that. And that was another risk. I'd never really left the US. I had no concept of like working abroad. That was my family. A lot of members of my family are in the military. So that's the only exposure I'd had to like leaving the US to do work, working
So
for
were
the
you
US military. Yeah.
so were you teaching in actual English there, or you were?
So I was a science teacher. I was a middle school science teacher in the US, but they were hiring English teachers. But they said, it doesn't matter. You speak English. You're a native speaker. You can come and teach English because it was really ESL. So I went in and taught grade 11 and grade 10, 11, and 12 English classes. But it was really, they said it was like English class. It was supposed to be English like literature class, but actually it was language acquisition. So it wasn't that hard. Like it wasn't that hard from a pedagogical standpoint because these kids had basically no English. So I just got them to engage in English, and their results improved already because of that.
And then from that experience, where did life lead
Yeah.
you in terms of just life and then your financial
Yeah. So
situation?
the financial trajectory from there was that I suddenly had disposable income. And it only took me a few years, like the first time in my life, because I grew up very penny pinching, like really not having enough to make ends meet by the end of the month. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck. The lights were cut off sometimes when I was growing up. So like a sense of scarcity and not having enough was present in my life, my entire life. So here I was 28 years old, and suddenly I could like go to the mall and buy new clothes. I had never done that. I'd only worn used clothing for my whole life, right? So this was like really like new to me. And so I could afford to go get my nails done. I could afford to travel. I could afford to go out to eat without thinking about how much it cost. And so this was like totally new world. So I did pay off my loans, but I had no concept of what to do with money, of how to build wealth. And so I did have a bank balance building up, but I would mostly just spend it because I didn't know what to do with money. And I started dating a guy there who comes from a family of expats who'd lived around the world and who had spent his whole life traveling. And he said to me, why don't we save up? If we save half of our income for a year, then we can take a year off and travel and just go backpacking. And that was like mind blowing to me, that you could set money aside and not work. Like that math, like the math is simple, right? But it had never entered my head that could even be possible. So that was maybe 2013 or 2012, we had that conversation. 2014, we quit our jobs and we went and traveled for a year. So over that year, sort of the 2013 school year, I started saving more than half of my income because I got really, really tight with money. I didn't go out. If I went out, I would like order a soda water. I stopped spending money in every way possible. I even slept on couches for a while, so that I could save on rent, right? Like I got really crazy frugal because I was so motivated to not have to work for a year. And during that time, I thought, well, now I've got a big pile of money in my account. The goal was to get to $30,000. And so at that point, I probably had $10,000 or $20,000 in my savings account. And I was like, I need to be responsible. I can't just let this money sit in my savings account making 0.05% interest. So if you are ever an expat, you will probably get a million people calling you saying they're financial advisors and come have a coffee, and they'll talk to you about offshore savings plans. So I got wrapped up in one of these offshore savings plans, which is a massive trap for expats, particularly in less regulated areas like the Middle East. So I thought I was investing in a short-term investment that was flexible and I would be able to get my money out whenever I needed, because literally I wanted to invest the money for a year because my goal was the travel, right? In the end, I ended up saving so much that I didn't need to get that money out after a year. I was actually able to leave everything I invested because at the end of my contract, in the UAE, you get an end of service payment. They don't do pensions or 401ks or anything like that. You get what they call an end of service. So you get a couple months salary at the end of your contract to sort of make up for the years that you'd worked with them. So I got an end of service benefit that helped me. I was able to almost live for the next year off of that end of service benefit. So the money that I'd invested, I actually left it invested while I was traveling for the year, but I stopped sending new money. When I came back in 2015, so we left in 2014, we came back in 2015, I looked at my account balance and it had gone down. And so I don't understand how an investment goes down when the stock market itself is going up, right? Because they'll tell you it's market returns, right? Like we can't predict the results because the market's volatile. But in reality, you could see in the news, the market was, but my investments, which were supposed to be globally diversified, were down. So like, how does that work out? Well, it turns out I wasn't invested. I had actually bought a whole life insurance plan. In the US, they call them indexed universal life plans. In the rest of the world, it's often called investment-backed whole life insurance policy. But that's not what my advisor told me. He told me I was investing in the stock market. But in reality, I had bought a life insurance policy. So it was a legal product that was sold to me as a scam, right? That it was a bait and switch scam. The guy told me I was getting one thing, but actually he sold me something else. So I figured that I'd got burned. I'd lost about $5,000, which at that time was a lot of money to me, like considering that I'd been very financially insecure most of my life. And so I felt enormous shame that I'd messed it up. I really screwed up, that I didn't know how to handle money, that I'd been fooled. And I turned that anger and that frustration and that shame into learning how to invest myself. And so I started reading. I like to say I read the whole internet. I found the FIRE community online. I read the entire Boggleheads wiki, everything they had to say about expat investing, because it's different than when you're in the US. I read Mr. Money Mustache's entire blog. I started reading Early Retirement Now. I read the Mad Fientists. I used his calculators. I started reading other FIRE bloggers as well. And I just learned. And I ended up reading a book by a guy named Andrew Hallam that wrote a book for international school teachers to learn how to invest for their future. And he has a section for every nationality, basically, in his book. So he talks about Americans and Canadians and Brits and whomever else. So it's a really good like how-to guide to like know how to start investing. So just very basic stuff. So I started investing very, very basically, and I started volunteering with a small group that was forming around this same problem. People just like me who'd gotten burned by these scammy policies that say they're offshore savings plans or they say they're investments, but they were actually life insurance. And you lose money. And so there were a lot of people at that time. Those policies were being very aggressively marketed in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So there were tons of people just like me who'd done the same thing. And we formed a group. Another guy named Sebastian Aguilar started a group he called Common Sense Personal Finance and Personal Investing or something, Personal Finance and Invest, something like that. And he started this Facebook group and he started having meetups. And so I started hosting meetups in my home in Abu Dhabi because most of their events were in Dubai. And I started talking to others and learning from others, but then eventually started teaching others about personal finance as well. So I volunteered with that group for quite a long time. And I would say my husband and I, it was about 2016, 2017 when we really got it and we started properly investing. So 2015 is when I figured I'd lost the money. 2016, I started really, really learning. And by 2017, I was investing on my own in my own brokerage account, managing my own ETF portfolio and teaching other people how to do it as well. And from that point, it took us, it was about 8 years until we hit our FI number. So for people that don't know what FI is financial independence, but those words have multiple meanings. In the FIRE movement, when we talk about financial independence, what we mean is that you have investments that can produce income for you that is enough to fund your life. So you no longer need to work for a living. Your living is passively funded through your investments. So you have essentially retirement income, but you don't have to be at retirement age. And you don't have to stop working either if you don't want to, but it gives you the freedom to take risks and take chances because you know that your life expenses, your rent, your food, your education expenses, your travel expenses, those are going to be covered by your investments forever. And just to add a little extra bonus here, if you want to know how much money you need to do that, the first thing you have to know is how much does your life cost? So the first step is to print out your bank statements for the past 12 months and calculate how much you spent over the past 12 months. And it doesn't matter what you were spending on. You could have been supporting friends or it could have been travel that you don't normally do. It doesn't matter. If you spent the money in the past 12 months, you add it up, you get an annual total. Once you know how much life costs you for 12 months, you multiply that number by 25, and that's the target portfolio number. That's the amount of money you need invested in the stock market in order to live off of it forever.
I have a question for me personally about
Sure.
that situation because I've done that many times to figure out that number. But I made the mistake of buying a very old ancient house in France, and every 6 months there's a new discovery of, you know, expenses I never thought I would have to pay. The whole house flooded, a hot water tank broke, the exterior is slowly crumbling, and I've been quoted 30,000 euros to fix it. Things like that, where it's every year I would say it's anywhere from 5 to 25,000 euros at the moment. And yeah, maybe eventually things will be sort of stable in terms of my housing situation. But do you just sort of overestimate when it comes to that?
So here's
Or
the
are,
thing. I think where people get housing and buying property wrong is that if you're living in a property, you have to pay rent to yourself. So when you're doing this maintenance and these things break, that's essentially effectively the rent that you're paying to yourself, right? So if you were to buy a property and you were to rent it out, you would be collecting rent that would cover most of those. Hopefully, you would be collecting enough rent to cover most of that maintenance with some profit, right? So because your property, your investment is not rented out, you are effectively subtracting that income from your life. So here's the thing. Even if you own your house and even if it's not an old house and there isn't as much maintenance to do, living in a place costs money. Maintenance is expensive. You're going to have property taxes. If you're living in a community, you're going to have community fees. Living in a place costs money, even if it's paid off, even if you don't have to replace the roof. Once you add in that you have to replace your roof every once in a while, like every 30 years or something, and then your water heater every 10 or 15 or 20 years, you probably need to do some kind of maintenance on that, and every other thing in the house, it is expensive to live in a place. So this is why it's important to calculate what you actually spent over the past 12 months, because on average, you will have spent something on your house over the past 12 months. So that is calculated into the number already. If you're a renter, it's a lot easier because as a renter, you pay the same amount every month, right? And you can choose to go to a place that costs more or a place that costs less. And yes, there is sometimes an increase in your rent, like a 5% increase or a 10% increase, but you can be pretty sure of how much you're going to pay for housing every single month. Whereas if you're a homeowner, it's wildly variable. You may have a year where you pay nothing except for property taxes, right? But then you'll have a year where you have to replace the roof or the basement floods, and then it's a catastrophic expense. So you kind of have to budget as though you're paying rent anyway, even though you have the house. So in a year where you don't spend anything on the house, that money should be building up a sinking fund to cover the years where you do have to do something.
And I want to go back to you. I mean, you hit so many things, but I had this similar thing in high school where in economic class they told you like pick a couple stocks and then you tracked it. You know, back in the day when it was actually you had to look in a newspaper and
Yep.
like once a week we would check it.
Yep.
And I remember one of the stocks I chose was Nike, which I probably if I actually would have invested that money, it'd probably be worth quite a bit, even though it's not like some other stocks. But and it went up, you know, like $1, I think, over like a 6 month period. And I realized like the power of that. But at that time, it was so hard to navigate how to buy stock compared to
Yeah.
now, where you just pick up your phone and, oh, I want to buy, sell, like immediately. Everything's, you know, instant. And so I never really invested at that point, like in my early, you know, my 20s, because I didn't know how to like work the system. I even my first job, I worked with an Arabic man from Jordan, and he's got a very thick accent. And it was back in the day when you had to call like an 800 number to check on your stocks to get like real time numbers. And he could never say it clearly enough for the automation to understand. And he would get so frustrated and start cursing at it. And this is working at a Little Caesars where there's like customers and pizzas going around. And he'd be like, UW ooh, or like, no, like it's UWE, like, and then you'd get angry and you're like, you say it. And so I'd be basically checking stocks that I didn't even know what they were, but like I
Wow.
got into the idea of like there's a reason he does this every day. Like it's motivating him to get out of working at Little Caesars. And eventually I think his investments really did pay off because he ended up doing, you know, opening other shops and starting his own restaurant. And so I saw like in different glimpses in my life um, how amazing investing can be. And I think I'm kind of unique from my upbringing, anyways, because I grew up very middle class, and I don't remember anyone, and still to this day, that has any knowledge in terms of investing. And so I guess if someone happens to watch this who doesn't know anything about what you're talking about. Investing has nothing. They just, you know, have all their money in a savings account, or they have no money and they need to really, you know, double down and make income and then start investing. What's the regret? Maybe they're not going to ever be, you know, financially independent before retirement age, but what's the obviously it's money, but what's going to be the regret if they don't do something now and change things?
So there's a thing called opportunity cost. Now, I want to address something first before I answer that question. The first thing I want to address is that there are two major types of investing. There's active investing, which is what your friend was doing, where you buy individual stocks and you think about, you try to find the one that's going to go up, right? And then there's passive investing. If you want to use the FIRE community's math, you need to be doing passive investing. And the difference is active investing, you have to pay attention. Passive investing, you don't. Active investing, you choose individual companies to buy. Passive investing, you buy the entire index, the entire stock market. So in the US, you might buy only the S&P 500. But for most people who are living internationally, you should really be buying the entire world stock market to take out that single country risk. So that's point number one. You do not have to be actively involved in investing in order to get the returns to get to FI. You can do it passively. That's the way that I got here, through passive investing. I've never owned a single stock ever in my life. I only own an index fund, which covers the entire world. But then when it comes to the regrets are not about the money. And I want to make this clear. $1 million is a fun, it's a fun metric because when you're a kid, you think about being a millionaire, right? But the reality is that $1 million may not be nearly enough for some people living in some places. I live in rural France. it's a lot of money here. And it can fund $40,000 a year of income. So the goal was my husband would have $1 million, I would have $1 million. We'd have $80,000 a year to live off of. And that's a very reasonable middle-class income in this area of the world. If you're living in New York or Paris, you're not going to live so comfortably on that. So the absolute numbers, they don't matter nearly as much as we think they do. It's actually about percentages. It's actually about how much money you need compared to how much your life costs, right? It's about that comparison, right? But here's the thing. It's not actually about the money at all. Money is simply the tool that you use to create the life that you actually want to live. So one of my main motivations for FIRE was that I did not want to be a teacher forever. I was a middle school teacher. It is incredibly emotionally draining. You are around pubescent children all the time, and they are having emotional meltdowns all the time. It is incredibly draining. And I knew that I couldn't do that forever. I didn't want to do that forever. So the idea of having my time for me, where I could choose how I spend my time, I could choose where I live, I could choose what I do with my time. That was the motivator for me. And I think that's really what's behind the FIRE movement, is about being able to create the life you want to live. For some people like me, quitting my job was a huge part of that. For other people, it might be not quitting the job, but maybe going part-time, or maybe opening your own company and doing the same thing you already do because you love it, or maybe becoming location independent, or maybe there's 10,000 iterations of what that could mean for different people. So the regret comes down to lack of choice. When you create financial freedom, you create opportunities to make choices. When you don't do that investing, when you put it off and you don't look at it, you take away opportunity from yourself. And what the opportunity cost really is that money grows over time. It's the way compound interest works. So the stock market, on average, if you invest in an index fund, on average, you're going to get 10% per year returns, but not every year. Some years are negative, some years are positive, but it averages out to about 10% per year. So your portfolio grows by about 10% every year. When your portfolio grows by 10%, the next year, you get 10% of that 110%, right? You don't just have your baseline and you get the 10% every year. So you don't have like $1,000 and you get $100 every year. You get 10% of the $1,100 the next year. And that seems like really small at first, but the compounding happens over time and you end up with an exponential growth graph. So the longer time period you have, the more momentum, the more snowballing, and actually the less money you have to save. So if you're 20 years old and you're listening to this right now and you start putting away a very small fraction of your income, that can snowball to being a multimillionaire when you're retired. If you're starting in your 50s and you only have maybe 10 years before you retire, then you're going to have to save a lot more to arrive at the same place. So time makes a huge difference in your investing returns, right? The longer time period you have, the more return you're going to get. In fact, Warren Buffett, he was in his 60s when he actually started making huge amounts of money. Most of the money that he made was in his old age because of the compounding factor. That wealth he already had invested was compounding more and more. So time is your friend when it comes to investing. This is why investing today is the best opportunity that you have, because we can't go back and start when we were 20, right? I didn't start till I was in my mid-30s. But you can start today. And from today onward, the compounding will still happen. And I want to shout out to the people who might be 50 or 60 years old. Your investing horizon does not end the day you retire. The money that you invest stays invested for the rest of your life. So if you're 65 and you're about to retire and you have not started investing yet, and you've got a pile of cash in your savings account just waiting for you to spend on it, you can invest that today, and that money will grow over the years of your retirement to make sure you don't run out in the long term. So the compounding and the growth of the investments can be to get to FI. It'll grow to get you there, and then it'll grow while you're FI, while you're retired, while you're drawing down from your portfolio to make sure that the money never runs out. That's the thing that is so mind-boggling. If you're following the 4% rule, if you have at minimum 50% of your assets in the stock market, ideally closer to 75% of your assets in a broad market index fund, like a world index fund, if you've invested that way, you will most likely never, ever run out of money. And your portfolio, in most cases, will be many times bigger when you die than it is today, even though you're living off of it. Like, the math is just like phenomenal. Now, I will say there are a few tiny cases, like if you were to retire the day of the market peak in 2000, right before the dot-com crash, then you have a chance of running out of money because we had a 10-year period of near no growth in the stock market. But that's only if that's the day you retired. If that's the day you retired and you saw the stock market crashing and you decided to go back to work part-time for a couple of years, you'd be fine. And there's only really two time periods in history where that's the case. It's there was a time period, I think, in the 60s and 70s where there was really high inflation and really bad stock market returns. And then the lost decade is considered the time period from 2000 to 2010 is considered the lost decade, and it's considered the worst time to be an investor in history. So that's in memory, right? And there are ways that you can mitigate that risk of running out of money. But for the vast majority of people, 98% of the time, just following the 4% rule means you will never run out of money.
What's your opinion on we're in the biggest bubble of all time, this AI bubble? That's the that's like the go-to thing to get a viral clip. I feel like if you're anything in terms of like financial person, they love to bring that up and go, this it's happening, we're in it, it's
Yeah,
worse than the dot-com. I
sure.
think it's where all the valuations are absolutely nuts. There's all these signs that AI is not as great as we've been sold, and it's all going to come crumbling down, and we're going to basically hit zero in a way. How do you not even think of that and just keep going, or
Well,
are
here's the
you
thing. That same thing has been being said for like the past 5 years, that
right?
valuations are higher than they've ever been. We're at all-time highs. And last year, the same conversation was happening. And the year before, the same conversation was happening, right? So yes, it will crash. AI, a lot, like just like the dot-com, a few will rise to the top and a lot of it's going to crash. And maybe, I mean, I do think AI is a technology that is already revolutionizing our world. Like, we see the changes in our world already. But it can't go up forever. It's going to come back down. It will. And we actually had a correction in 2021, 2022. 2022, we had an all-time high. Then we had a big correction for 2 years where the stock market never reached that all-time high again for 2 full years, right? So we already had a correction like that. That is normal. That's going to happen. And it might last 5 years instead of 2 years. Or we could have a 10-year period where we don't reach that all-time high again for 10 years. But if you're still investing, like for me, that's a problem. I have to pay attention to that, and I have to worry about that because I'm living on my investments. But for you, if you're still investing, that time period is the best possible time to be investing. Because if the stock market crashes, you get to buy the same share for 20, 30, maybe even 40% less than it would have cost a month ago. So it's just a discount on the shares. So the way you have to look at the stock market when you're a passive investor and you're a long-term investor and you're investing for financial freedom, you're not vesting to make alpha or to churn things over as a day trader. When you're doing this long-term investing, when the stock market crashes, it's stocks on sale. That's what it is. It's the ETF is on sale. And it's the best possible thing that could happen to you while you're still investing, while you're still earning money. Where that is a concern is if you retire and you happen to pull the plug and start withdrawing from your portfolio the very day that we're at the all-time high. Like, let's say you have a 2 million FI number like my husband and I did, and you reach 2 million, and that happens to be the day that you got 2 million, you immediately quit your job, you don't pay attention to anything else, and you just start drawing your $80,000 a year out of your portfolio immediately without paying attention, you will run out of money. But the reality is, we hit our FI number a month or two before we even noticed that we had hit it, because the stock market does this all the time. And once we hit our FI number, my husband wasn't quite ready. It was unexpected. The stock market is volatile and wild. We weren't ready to completely retire yet. I had already left working, but my husband was still working full time, and he wanted to keep working until my daughter finished the school year. So he worked for an entire year after we hit our FI number, which means that our portfolio kept growing even though we'd already passed our FI number. We didn't start drawing out from it yet. And so because of that, our portfolio is even bigger now. And when we take that $80,000 a year out, it's a smaller percentage. It's such a small percentage now, it's close to 3%. There has never been a time period in history where we would run out of money at this point. So in reality, that risk, it exists, but it can be mitigated by just working a little bit longer, or by going part-time and earning some money when you go into retirement instead of cutting the cord immediately and going to entirely living off of your portfolio. So when I see stock market volatility, I've been investing for about 10 years now. Yeah, right about 10 years I've been investing. And I have seen a lot of this. In COVID, do you remember how terrifying that was? And the stock market crashed by like 30% over 2 days. It was the steepest decline ever in history, right? At that time, because I had this mentality, I was like, awesome. When I invest next month, when my salary comes, I'm going to get stocks on discount. So it was really good for me. And that helped me get where I am now faster because I was buying the same ETFs for less money. So it was better for me. But you have to have that mentality that you do not care about the valuation of the stock market today. That's not what matters to you. What matters to you is the stock market valuation when you're in retirement, when you're drawing down. That's what actually matters. So that's maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, maybe 40 years from now. How much it's worth then is what matters, because that's when you're going to be selling those shares. Right now, you're just buying. So if the stock market goes on discount, that's like really good for you.
During COVID, I got obsessed. I was working from home. I was lucky enough to still, work remotely. And I would, during work, I would be watching YouTubers, but I had like my three go-to guys. One was more index investing, one was crypto, and then one was day trading. And, I just watched everything they put out and educated myself and did a little bit of all of it and realized, oh, I don't like the risky stuff. And so then I realized sort of how to do it for myself. And obviously I'm no expert like you, but I think I have a better grasp and understand um, you don't want to be on the sideline waiting for the right time to invest. You
You
need to be
can't know.
dollar cost. Yeah, you need to be dollar cost averaging in, and you want your money to work for you.
Yeah,
But I don't think many, and maybe it's just my circle, even my wife, and I think it's because she's French and French really don't understand this sort of stuff. It's really completely against the way they think of like setting themselves up for retirement and things like that. But even when you break it down, which you've done many times in this 30 minutes, of like, it is kind of simple in a way where
very
you,
simple.
but I think the problem, and you hit on this too, is that people think of it as going to the casino and
Yeah.
they're putting all their life savings on black and it's gonna go
Well,
gone
and
like
that
that.
is, so here's the way I like to explain this is the stock market is like a deck of cards. With a deck of cards, you can play Go Fish, or you can play Rummy, or you can play Canasta. It's a game I'm playing now. Or you can go play blackjack and lose all your money betting and gambling. You can play poker, right? Like, you can choose how you use the deck of cards. You can gamble with it, or you can play a game that's just going to, be fun and build community. With the stock market, it's the same thing. You can choose to gamble. You can choose to try to predict what is going to go up and what isn't. You can choose to pick and choose stock. This is active investing. It's called speculation, trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. You can do that, and that is gambling. It truly is gambling. Or you can take a passive indexing approach, which is not at all gambling. You are betting, but you're betting on the entire world's economy. And history has shown us that over long periods of time, the world's economy always goes up. There are instances of a single country staying flat for many years, like Japan, right? I think it was after the 80s, like it had like 20 years of no growth in their stock market. I think there are instances of entire economies falling out the bottom, like Russia has had more than one time where their entire stock market shut down. right? So this is why I don't think it's wise. I don't think it's wise for anyone to invest only in one country, even if that country is the US. Like, I don't think S&P 500 is the right investment, because you can easily get a world tracker for the same amount of effort, the same amount of cost, and then you've hedged your bets. You're including Europe and Asia and South America and the Middle East. You're including everything. So if the US goes through a long period of recession like Japan did, then your bets are hedged. You're evened out by having the rest of the world, right? So I think that the important thing to know is that just because it's the stock market doesn't mean it's speculation. Just because it's the stock market doesn't mean that you're predicting the future. And just because it's the stock market doesn't mean that it's risky. Now, I have to caveat that, because risk in investing can be often broken down to volatility. Often what people talk about, what financial advisors and financial educators talk about when they're talking about risk, is volatility. The price is going to change over the short term. So you might buy it for $100 and it might drop to $50. And that's what volatility is. It might go back up to 150 after that, but it's very emotionally a roller coaster, right? To watch your money do this all the time. So that's what most investors are afraid of. But the reality is, this daily up and down, or this weekly or monthly or yearly up and down, when you zoom out and you look over a long time period, the number flattens out. Still some volatility, but it's up and to the right. And actually, I should do it this way because video is always reversed, right? It's up and to the right. That's what the stock market does over time, the whole stock market. If you look at an individual company, it might skyrocket, plateau, and then crash. Like, that's the typical trajectory of an all-star company, is that it's small, they get an idea that makes them go, that it skyrockets, then it plateaus while they're this huge company, and they stay big for a long time, and then a new technology comes along, and then they go down, right? That's what happened to film cameras, right? Like your Kodak type companies. They were really big, and then all of a sudden, if they didn't pivot properly, they sort of petered out. There are very few companies that have been around for 50 years. There's very few. Most companies don't last. This is why betting on the whole market is safer, because you have the new companies and the old companies and everything in between, and you're getting the average, right? But the trouble is, in high school and in the media, the only way people talk about the stock market is in short-term returns. They talk about day traders, they talk about hedge funds, they talk about options traders, they talk about prediction markets. That's how people talk about the stock market. But the reality is very boring. Real, true, long-term investing is very boring. That's why it's not in the media. It's very simple. I've just explained it to you today, right? It's not easy to stick with because of all of the noise, the market noise, right? And you do need to open a brokerage account, and you do need to navigate the tax situation in the country that you live in. But the fundamentals are very straightforward. It's very, very easy. Anyone can understand it, but then implementing it can be hard because of the emotional baggage we have around this, because of the cultural context that we live in, because of the news that we hear. Like, implementing can be hard. This is why building a community, this is why the FIRE community is a community, because you need other people around you to help you when you are freaking out, to have someone else to help remind you, actually, we've been here before. We've done this before. Just zoom out. Look long term. Don't look at the short term.
I mean, I could talk about so many things with you for so long, but I just wanted to hit on something that, and I don't know if you've had this with, because I haven't looked at a lot of your posts on LinkedIn, to be honest, but I've sharing living in France, and some of those posts have gone viral, and there's some of the trolls out there who was, well, isn't it nice to, have got out and now your life's perfect and you must be a millionaire. Well, your situation sort of is. You are a
And
millionaire, but
yeah.
but I guess that's the problem with that key term, is that people associate that with, like, oh, now she's like out on her boat and drinking cocktails, and there's like this, it must be nice, and it instantly happened for you and you're so privileged. But if you listen to most people, especially like FIRE community, there was a lot of years where you went without to make
Mm.
this happen. And now, even that you're a millionaire on paper, you're still not living a lavish lifestyle.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you have you're doing better than most probably middle class French households, but
Yeah.
in terms of American households, you would be living, not great, like you said, in New York City, with $80,000
No.
to your name to
Yeah.
live off a year. So I guess there's a lot of myths, and people instantly like, I guess they instantly take themselves out of this idea of doing it for themselves because they think it's a thing of privilege when it's not. It's you educated yourself and you applied the things you learned, and there was a goal in mind, and you
Yeah.
finally reached that goal.
Well, I want to point out that it is a thing of privilege. The stock market was always for the wealthy. And it's only since ETFs, index funds and ETFs became readily available that it's accessible to the middle class. And I will also point out, if you are not middle class, if you're working for minimum wage as a waitress or as a laborer or baking bread at 4 a.m. like I was, you're not going to get ahead. There is a point where you have to have more income. Like you need to get to a point where there's a difference between what you have to spend and what you earn. And that difference is what you invest. And the bigger you can make that difference, the better. So there's two ways to get there. You increase your income or you decrease your expenses. If you're already making a good salary, you're above median salary and you're not in a high cost of living area. For your area, let's just say that for your area, you're above the median income, then you should be focusing on reducing your expenses. You should be, because there's room there for you to do that because other people are living on less than you, right? But if you are not at median income for where you're living, then you need to focus on earning more money because you need to be able to eat healthy food. You need to be able to have some pleasure in your life. You need to not only be, eating rice and beans with no onions, right? Like that is not a life. You need to be able to make a life that is good today also. This is something that I do like to talk about because financial freedom doesn't start the day you hit 5. Financial freedom starts the day that money no longer controls you. And money can control you because you don't have enough of it, or money can control you because you think money is the goal and you are afraid to spend your money. There's a problem in the financial advisor community. So I talk and collaborate with a lot of actual CFP financial advisors. And there's a problem in the financial advisor community where retirees who have been frugal and they've been disciplined and they've done without, and they get to retirement and they're afraid to spend their money because they have an internalized idea that they're a saver, that spending is wrong, that saving is good. And so they have huge portfolios that will never run out, more than they could ever want. And they are afraid to spend it. Now, that's not most people, but that exists, right? And that is still a form of money controlling you. The whole purpose of FIRE is financial freedom. It's not just having a big portfolio, not having to work. It's about having choice. But you can have choice today. Now, if you are really struggling, your choices are going to be more limited. There will be financial constraints on those choices. But you can choose how to approach your daily life right now. You can choose, I like to call it the 5 life skills. You can choose to live a life of abundance, even if you don't have a huge income. You can choose to live a life of generosity, even if you're saving for the future. Like you can choose to develop good emotional boundaries. You can choose to develop a strong sense of identity and self-worth right now. And those are skills that are important when you leave work. Because with internalized capitalism, so many of us are ingrained to think that our value is the paycheck that we get, that that's a measure of how much we are worth as a person, and that our value is our contributions to society in whatever way that might be, whether you're helping people as a teacher like I did, or whether you're a writer or you're creating artistic works, or it doesn't matter what it is, but you have this sense of self-worth tied to your work. And that has to be decoupled in order for you to not have a mental health crisis when you retire. A lot of people in the FIRE community, they focus on the numbers and they forget about their life. And then they get to FI and they have a panic attack. And a lot of people don't quit their jobs because they're scared to quit their job and leave their meaning. Or they quit their job and they fall into depression and they don't leave their house. So they have all the time in the world and they have the money to do what they want. And they're curled up in the fetal position, scrolling on the internet because they haven't built the ability to feel okay with who they are. separate from job, separate from money, separate from frugality. So like that, those are like life skills I think all people need, but you don't have to wait until you have $1 million to build those skills. You can build those skills now. In fact, a lot of people, for me, leaving work early was hugely important. It's what I really wanted. But that's not what everyone wants. I wanted to be location independent. I wanted to be able to come live in a tiny village in France for a while and travel when I want to. But that's not what a lot of people want. A lot of people want to stay where they are and continue contributing in their industry. You can still build the mentality of financial freedom, no matter where you are. And you can do FI slowly. You don't have to do it quickly. There's this thing called coast FI, where you front load your investments in your 20s and 30s, or starting wherever you are now. You get enough invested. It's not enough for you to live on now, but it's enough where you don't have to save anymore. It's enough where it will grow at 65. It'll be the right amount for you to live on at 65. So now you can take a lower paid job, or you can take a risk on yourself because you don't need a margin anymore. You can have a lower income and still live the same quality of life because your future is already secured, right? Or it can be, for some people, it's just having that FU money. When you have enough money where you could walk away from a bad job, your mentality completely changes. But like, whenever we talk about mentality, I think we also have to remember that not all financial advice is right for all people at all points in their life. When you are broke and you are making minimum wage, that is not a mentality problem. That's a money problem. So you have to solve the money problem, right? But when you're in a job that you hate and you're trapped with like the golden handcuffs because you're afraid, like that's a mentality problem. That's where it is. Or when you have money and you're afraid to spend it, that's a mentality problem. So we can work on the mentality problem and work on the money problem at the same time. That's going to give you a better outcome.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that. I sort of, people get really mad when I say this, but I escaped the US. The reason I escaped the US is that I could live off savings and figure out what my next business idea is in France because the cost of living is just so much cheaper. And my money went so much further in terms of housing and things like that. Northern California, I was working 2 to 3 jobs just to pay the bills, and everything was just getting to the point where it wasn't affordable, and healthcare was going to be not even an option to have healthcare.
Yeah.
So I say escaped or fled kind of on purpose, because the reason I did it was to live the life I want. And maybe I'm going to regret not having a lot of income right now because I'm not able to invest. But I think life is too short as well. So whatever your goal is, whatever you're trying to do, just do it as well,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
never know when today is the last day. And so that's sort of, I agree with everything you're doing. I wish I had more money to put into index funds at this moment, but I do have myself sort of set up where I think I'll be okay
Well, what you
when I'm
can do, Dustin,
65.
so if you're in a place where you don't have additional money to invest, a lot of us, if you're coming from the US, you probably have a 401k somewhere. You might have a couple IRAs or Roth IRAs sitting around. You may have Social Security credits. Just looking at what you have and making sure that's invested properly. I love this story. I had a client a week ago who we just looked at her Vanguard account, and she had an IRA there, and she's like, oh yeah, there's my IRA, that's how much is in it. It's like, no, click on it. We clicked on it, and her IRA was sitting in a money market fund, which means it was in a savings account. So she had $47,000 sitting in a savings account, and it'd been there for a year already because she had rolled it over from another provider. And in the rollover, she just hadn't chosen a fund to put it in. So over that year, I went back and calculated if she had bought Vanguard Total, the Total World Stock Fund from Vanguard, if she had bought it a year ago, she would have made $12,000. $12,000 opportunity cost that's just not in her portfolio, that would have been in her portfolio had she just looked 12 months earlier. So even if you don't have a lot of money to invest, what you can do is look at what you do have and make sure what you do have already is invested. If you have pensions from back in the US, I had 2 teachers' pensions because I worked in a public school and then I worked in a private school. The private school pension was invested with TIAA CREF. They're a reasonable 401k type company, and they had everything reasonably invested in world stocks. So I've left that one as it is. But my Georgia teacher's pension fund is a defined benefit pension fund, a defined benefit pension fund. And that means that you put in the money and your money goes to pay other people's pensions today, and then future people will pay your pension in the future. So the money doesn't grow. And if you don't work for 25 years, you don't get it. You get nothing, right? So I was able to pull that money out and put it into an IRA and then get that invested and start working.
Yeah, I haven't worked many jobs where there was 401ks or retirements, but I've done I was self-employed for a long time and learned to put money in a lot of indexes. So I'm doing pretty good, but I mean, the stock market's like at all-time highs still. So
Yeah.
um,
But
I
don't
always
let
fear that.
that dissuade you, because the stock market is at an all-time high most of the time. Like it's something like 50% of the time, the stock market is at an all-time high. It's like,
Mm,
it may not be, I don't have the statistic in my head, but you have an all-time high like every other day. In
mm.
fact, over the course of a year, 60% of the time, the stock market goes up over the course of the year. If the stock market is going up, it's probably at an all-time high, right? Most likely. And it's only 40% of the time that the stock market goes down. So you can't know if this all-time high is going to stop today or if it's going to stop in 3 years. You cannot know. So don't try. Don't try to predict. Like just step out of that predictions market, step out of the gambling mindset, the timing the market mindset, and just trust that the price today may be high, but it's going to be higher in 20 years. And you need to judge the price today by what it will be in 20 years, not by what it will be in 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Also the exhaustion if you're trying to predict, like individual stocks, you're always checking. It's a day-to-day thing, and you're like, should I sell? Should I buy
But
more?
stressful.
Yeah, it's and I feel like I got pretty lucky. I haven't lost really anything. I haven't made huge amounts of money, but I got in on Tesla like pretty early on and things like that. But I feel like I just got lucky. I just watch a lot of YouTube and people were saying this is the time, and I bought into the idea that robot cars are going to be a thing, and everything Elon Musk says hasn't really panned out that way, but he's somehow able to get people to invest in anything he touches, which I know everyone hates Elon Musk, but he made a lot of people a lot of money as well, not just for himself. But it's exhausting, that type of investing, and I would definitely not recommend it either because it's just stressful. And like if it's a bad Friday, your weekend's ruined. Like if you're down like 30% on a random stock and you put 10,000 on it, it's just like, why didn't I get out? And no one else knows why you're like upset, and
Yeah.
internally you're like freaking out, melting down. And so it's just not an enjoyable way to live your life unless that's, I guess, the way you really want to try to make money. And I know very few people who are day traders who consistently make money doing that. And I followed.
Most active traders lose money. The vast
Yeah,
majority of active traders lose money. Even the ones who are very good, they might do very well for a year or two, but over the long term, over longer periods of time, they lose money. The
yeah,
majority, even the hedge fund managers, the majority of them don't. So they don't necessarily lose money. They don't go negative necessarily, but they don't beat the index. And if they can't beat the index, they've technically lost money, because if they'd been in the index, they would have gotten more money, right? It's the opportunity cost. So the active investing is it's short-term thinking. It's highly stressful, like you said, and it makes you less money over time. Like you actually lose money when you do that. So it's a no-brainer, really, because when you index invest, it's boring. It's not a hobby. It's just going in the background. I'm not paying attention. I do spend my time talking about money all the time, but for other people, right? I don't actually spend very much money or very much time, or very much thought on my own portfolio. I think about it very little, actually.
yeah. And then there's also the tax implications if you're trying to be a day trader. That it's just like so many things that people do. Like I have a side hustle, and they're like, I made this amount, and you're like, yeah, but what about all of your expenses and the taxes? Yeah, you made $150 driving Uber around, driving people through Uber, and what about all these? Like, no, I
Yeah.
made $150. Yeah, that's not
Yeah. How
how
much
it
did you spend
works.
on tax and car
Yeah.
and yeah. Yeah.
Um. Well, this is great. hopefully this inspires, someone to try to live a similar life, or at least start investing some of their savings, and get in the market, because I think they'll be happy 20 years from now that they did. Where can people find you if they have more questions?
Yeah, so I have an active LinkedIn profile under my name, Blair Hoover. That's a great way to find me. I just started a Substack called Messify, kind of talking about what we talked about today, about how financial independence is actually for everyone, and you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be smart to do it. So that's sort of the theme of that Substack. So it's called Messify. I guess that's the tagline for it. And I also have a website. It's cyofinance.com. And if you want some advice, if you want some help, I offer free introductory calls to anyone, 15 minutes. You can ask me any questions you want. I always try to give something valuable to walk away with from those intro calls. And I do work with clients one-on-one for those that need additional support.
Well, thank you again for your time, Blair.
Have a lovely day.
You too.